This week in IT Sparkcast, Bird flies the EU Coop. Disgruntled employees are using AI to burn their legal team's billable hours, and Disney gets pwned by an AI-infected laptop. Ooh. Greetings and welcome to IT Sparkcast. I'm your host, John Barker.
I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's see what's going on out there.
It's Friday, February 28th. IT Sparkcast is a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now for the news bites. All right, Lou, what's going on?
We've had a weird week. So everybody has probably been watching the challenges and the fun we've had around some of the politics that have been happening between the United States and Europe. But one thing that really stood out recently was a speech given by the Vice President of the United States to European folks talking about freedom and innovation. So that's kind of a hot button issue. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the stuff that's happened in the wake of this. We got news via Reuters that cloud software firm Bird, one of the Netherlands' most prominent tech startups, plans to move its operations out of Europe, its CEO said. And they cited restrictive regulations and difficulties hiring skilled technology workers. So, quote from this gentleman, "We are mostly leaving Europe as it lacks the environment we need to innovate in an AI-first era of technology," CEO Robert Viss told Reuters on Monday. So we foresee that regulations in Europe will block true innovations in a global economy moving extremely fast to AI, he said in a text message responding to Reuters queries. So Bird's operations in the future will be mostly split between New York City, Singapore, and Dubai, he said. So I find this really, timing is interesting, that's for sure. But we've talked about this a bit, and the challenge is it's very difficult to pre-regulate something, technology, because you don't know where it's going to go. Now, I get it, the whole idea, John, of not wanting Sarah Connor to be found in Europe. But the question is, how is this going to impact things going forward if one of your software vendors is in Europe? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so this is really interesting, especially following up from our last week's conversation regarding the announcement from the EU about trying to foster innovation in Europe, specifically with AI, and an investment in that of a few hundred million euros applied directly to this area. And what we talked about then and we're talking about now is that the regulation that's being put in place, when you don't know what direction that technology, being AI, is going to go, makes it tricky. And I think that what we're seeing here is that Bird is concerned that regulation is going to stifle their innovation, and that by going to these three cities where they're going to be a little less restricted, then they'll be able to achieve whatever it is that their goal is and be a little bit more free to achieve that innovation. And that's not good for EU. I mean, we talked last week that over the last 20 years, we haven't seen a lot of innovation out of the EU in general, and that we've seen actually a restriction on cloud and other new technologies, in that in our past life at the last company, we actually saw a lot of trouble selling technologies that were cloud related, and there's a lot of good happening. I think that GDPR has a lot of good to it as far as protecting people's privacy, but I think that was also put in place afterwards, and it was put in place after we knew where the pitfalls were, and it's really good protection to be able to say, I want my data pulled off of this site. I want my data to be cleansed from this database and things like that. I think that those are great. I think we're starting to see some of that maybe pop up in the United States at some point. But
We need it.
we do,
We do
so
need it.
we
Yeah.
do need that. But to have try to do that in 1985 would have been a mistake, because we wouldn't have known what type of data would have been out there, what the cloud was back then, how is this data going to be secured, what kind of encryptions would have been used, how the data would have been shared, how it would have been disseminated and viewed, and what a web browser was, and things like that. So
we don't know. We
don't.
don't know. I mean, the other thing but what really concerns me about this announcement, so I've got a concern and I've got an observation. One of the concerns is they can't get people.
Yeah.
So what is going on with that? Whether or not folks are leaving to do this work somewhere else, or whether they're not producing these people, that is something they're going to need to look at. The other observation is, in a cloud-based world, John and I, we talk about this all the time. Does your location really matter? Right? This is sort of an immediate reverse of return to office. They basically said, hey, we're all cloud anyway.
Right.
We can bug out to wherever our environment needs to be. And that is something I think that John and I have foreseen as being a big future thing. Big thing. We've already seen some movement around it, but you can move to whatever regulatory environment that you want to have. Speaking of things that are scary.
So this is going to be a quick one, but we thought it was really interesting news. We wanted to mention that Microsoft is quietly testing a free ad-supported version of its Microsoft Office apps, specifically for the Windows version, with some limited functionality. It's going to trial a free ad-supported version of Office that lets you create and edit documents, but has limited features that only let you save directly to OneDrive. So this was first spotted by B-Bomb, and this includes inserted ads that are permanently on the screen and within the Word document, PowerPoint, Excel. Additionally, this new free version of Office only allows you to save those files, as I mentioned before, in OneDrive, meaning there's no ability to save or edit local files. Lou put a note in here. Are we having a zombie Clippy going to be coming by and come on here?
Am I irrationally afraid of Clippy? I don't know.
If they put an AI into Clippy could actually be useful. The problem with Clippy is he was way ahead of his time, and he was just not helpful. And, it looks like you're trying to write a document about this. Can I help? No, you really can't.
Now, it's interesting because they got an update from Microsoft Word through PC World. This. They got out and they said they're just conducting limited testing. Currently, there's no plans to launch an ad-free, ad-supported version of Microsoft Desktop apps.
Right. Sure. Of course not.
What
this reminds me of? I mean, just imagine having an ad right there in your interface as you're using Word or PowerPoint or whatever. And this reminds me in the 90s when Microsoft first introduced the toolbar. So before that, all of your options were inside the menu bars. If you remember back then, if you're as old as I am. And they first introduced the toolbar, and the toolbars were stackable. So this is before the ribbon bar. So I'm going way back. And you could actually add multiple toolbars. And so there was one for formatting the text and another one for building tables and, so forth. And in one of the computer magazines, whether it was Computer World or Byte or whatever it was back in the day, there was a humor column. And what they did was they said, they started stacking them up to the point where there was a little thin text edit window. And the joke was like, well, we're really running out of space. And the other person said, well, no problem. You could turn off the edit window. And it was just toolbars. So I think that's funny. And I think that the thing is that you kind of need space for the editing. You need space to be able to do stuff and just to use that up with an ad. What is that going to look like? Is it going to be so small that it's unobtrusive? Well, then you probably won't see it. But is it going to be so big that it is intrusive? Then it's going to be covering your document. Can you move it over to a side? I think it's going to be.
One of the questions I have to have coming out of this is, what is it going to take to get you to download LibreOffice?
There you go.
Seriously.
Absolutely.
OpenOffice, LibreOffice, I've been using it for years. If you're on Linux, that's what you used.
Yeah.
It was really interesting because the tools to move between the two ecosystems actually worked fairly well. I remember one time when I was back in my days when I was doing some technical marketing, I managed to do an animation with LibreOffice's version of PowerPoint you couldn't do in PowerPoint.
Yeah. Well,
And it actually moved into PowerPoint when I gave it to our graphics goddess. She's like, "How did you do this?"
Well, we keep talking about the fact that I'm a big Apple guy. And when you have Apple devices, you get the Apple suites of keynotes,
Keynote's pretty
numbers.
good.
They're pretty good, and they can do some funny things that you might not be able to do there. But every time I go to sit down with it, it's not as complete in some ways. And I ended up paying for my own subscription to Microsoft Office just because I needed some things, and I would get documents and they wouldn't format properly or whatever it was. So I don't know, maybe this is a way to get people to, that aren't willing to spend $100 a year or whatever it is. And they'll get some ad revenue out of it. This could be the future.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That you just gave me a really good use case.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah. All right.
You want to do something different?
Yeah, let's go to something different.
All right, let's talk about something different. And I'm going to make it enterprise applicable just for you.
I love it.
All right, so let's go. Google and Qualcomm will support 8 years of Android updates of the latest chip. So this news comes to us via 9 to 5 Google. It just released this week. And why are we talking about this on sort of an enterprise-focused webcast? So let me give you the news here, and then let's chat about what this could mean for folks who are in the enterprise ecosystem. So starting with smartphones running the Snapdragon Elite mobile platform. So this is starting with the very high end, right? Qualcomm technology now offers device manufacturers, which means, Samsung or whoever is included this chip has to opt for this. They're going to have to make sure that you get the updates up to 8 consecutive years of Android software and security updates. So smartphones launching with the newer Snapdragon 8 and 7 series mobile platforms will also be eligible to receive this extended support. So think about it from like now on, or the end of the year on is where it's going to go. So Qualcomm technology has worked with Google to allow the system on a chip like Snapdragon Elite mobile platform to receive this. So what they had to do, from what I could see, my reading of it, is they had to get Google to agree that certain HAL layers would not change significantly. HAL is the hardware abstraction layer inside of Linux that allows you to talk from the software directly to the hardware. So in order for them to update the firmware on those chips consecutively, that has to have been stabilized. So this is kind of a big deal. And even though right now they're targeting the 8 and the 7 series, I see this is probably going to be moving down. Why do we care about this in enterprise? There's 2 reasons, right? One is, as we're going to see when I get to the CVE of the week, personal device security matters. And there's a lot of folks out there that are running old phones, right? Currently, I believe Qualcomm only allows 3 years of updates. Apple's better. Apple does really well.
Well, I was gonna mention that as well, in that, the Apple fanboy in me wants to say, well, Apple's been doing this for years. I hear that in the reverse all the time. A new feature comes out that Apple has, and that Android's been doing for years. But at the end of the day, this is good, and we want both sides to be pushing the other. And this is one of those cases where, Apple has been doing something for years, and now Google's doing it with Android. It's great, and you're going to get into that, but it's really important, especially for the enterprise, that this type of thing happens. So go ahead and get back to that, Lou.
Really, because let's talk about enterprises that are doing large-scale operations like warehouse operations. We've talked about automation within warehouses like Amazon is doing, when you've got mobile devices that are running around a yard or stuff like that. In other words, these devices, the barcode scanners, the mobile printers, trackers, and stuff like that, we're using a lot of Wi-Fi right now to service this. We're having problems. And having the ability to deploy what there are certain use cases where having a cellular deployment would make a lot more sense, because cellular is sort of designed, the cellular standards are designed to work better in really, really nasty reflective RF environments, more so than Wi-Fi in some ways, in my experience. So, as a side note, for those of us who have no life and like to watch rocket launches, Intuitive Machines' second mission to the moon was announced, and on this is a 4G network in a box from Nokia. It's like this big, embedded into the system. And so within a couple weeks here, we'll have the first 4G network on the moon, which I think is pretty cool. But
That's awesome.
Why does it matter to you? Because if they're going to be able to do this for a lander, what do you think they're going to be able to do for your yard full of containers, or your warehouse full of shelving and reflective metal objects? So both John and I were talking about this pre-show, and it's like, well, we used to sell Wi-Fi, right? So we have to get this 4G stuff out of here, right? But if you had both modes, the ability for the system to switch, well, then the problem is, how long are the chips going to be good for? Now you've got to go into special support agreements and all this stuff, pain in the butt. With these guys coming in and saying, hey, let's do this thing for 8 years, not only is it going to help the high-end people who are buying, because we're seeing smaller and smaller increments of functionality as we evolve these chips. I mean, they're really, really good already, and now they're going to get even better, but they're not, the jump from last year's Qualcomm to this year's Qualcomm isn't as big as it was 10 years ago. So now other people are going to see, whoa, Qualcomm's offering 8 years. Maybe we should do it too. So now we're going to start seeing some of these technologies proliferate into the mobile devices we use in enterprise environments, especially materials handling, large system processing, medical devices, stuff like that, where it is now feasible for this to work. I think that's very, very cool.
It is very cool. And I think that we will see more 5G deployments in the enterprise. But even without that, there are plenty of Android devices out there in the enterprise. I'll tell you what, my son's got an Android handheld device that plays video games. It's a company called Ambernick. And we were out at breakfast the other day, and he kept hearing a Android notification that came from the point of sale system. And he was like, that sounds like my Ambernick. And, he didn't really know what it was. And then I pointed out that it was probably the point of sale system. It was probably running Android. It was the same as that. So they're all over the place. It's a really easy operating system to get and to use and to embed into all kinds of different devices. We know that companies like Zebra put it into barcode scanners. They're in a lot of cash registers and other, like I said, point of sale systems. They're in all kinds of embedded systems. In a lot of cases, it's replaced the old Windows CE. It's just, you're seeing it in more and more places. So the fact that those can get security updates and the newest firmware updates for longer periods of time is better for you.
Yes.
IT professional and the security of your enterprise, and allows you to make a choice on which vendor you buy from with peace of mind. And that's what it's all about.
So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Is it artificial intelligence or artificial stupidity?
Might be both.
Really?
So we got an article from Telegraph in the UK, and it's pointing out how some disgruntled employees are increasingly leveraging artificial intelligence to file numerous employment lawsuits against the businesses that they work for. So evidently they're really disgruntled. And so,
is this denial of service by AI?
Yeah, so it's denial of legal service, apparently.
Okay. So what are they doing?
A lot of these, the legal departments in these larger companies are seeing a rise in AI-generated legal claims. So employees are using these AI tools to draft and submit legal claims, leading to a surge in employment-related lawsuits. And we know in the UK and the rest of Europe that it's actually commonplace for employees to submit issues. We're working too many hours. We have employment agreements and various things like that. It's actually much more common in places like Germany and France, but it does happen in the UK as well.
Hmm.
But the problem is that because they're using AI, they can generate these claims more rapidly and in large volumes, which then overwhelms the businesses with these legal challenges. So the companies are facing this increased legal costs and resource allocations with the influx of these AI-generated claims. And they're finding that the ease of generating these claims are encouraging the frivolousness of these lawsuits and complicating the legal landscape for these employers. So a couple of examples. An individual reportedly used AI to generate approximately 4,600 job applications, leading to over 60 legal claims for discrimination. So this is somebody who's not even an employee yet, submitted these job claims across the board, and then filed for job discrimination because he didn't or she didn't get hired. Then another case highlights how AI can be employed to exploit legal systems, resulting in significant financial settlements. So again, we find that AI is helping us with our jobs. I know you're finding that it's helping with your jobs. Now people are finding it that it's helping them sue and create these lawsuits in order for their own gain as well. So this is getting crazy. So this brings up a lot of legal and ethical questions. If they're frivolous lawsuits, if they're unbiased, unbased lawsuits, like what is going on here? I don't know, Lou. What do you think?
Man, it's tough because, there was a quote from an employment partner at a law firm, Ali Murray, who said, many cases, the AI generated output is inaccurate, but we have to respond to it.
Right.
So the question is now, okay, when are they going to get an AI that talks back to the AI?
Right.
Which would make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we keep talking about the potential inaccuracy of AI generated content that could mean a lawsuit. But at this point, if I'm generating the lawsuit against the company, I don't really care how accurate it is. It's now becomes the problem of the attorneys of the company being sued to then come back and prove that it's inaccurate. And that's more work for them, and probably even more work than if it was accurate. And
That
it
is
just becomes this
true.
vicious cycle. So this is ugly, ugly, ugly. And you
And,
know
and
what? Considering this is Europe, and I mean, in this case, the UK, but this could be a driver for regulation saying that if you do this, that then you are now liable for the costs of the legal fees if you do this. So this could just get really ugly and generate more and more of those regulations that we're talking about that are problematic.
And the problem is there needs to be this function, right? If
Yeah.
there's something really nasty going on, there needs to be a method of addressing the challenge. And this is something that all legal systems struggle with.
Right.
But all legal systems also, for all intents and purposes, assume that you're acting in good faith.
Right.
And, so it's kind of interesting because in the article they said putting highly confidential information into programs such as ChatGPT is also putting privacy at risk, lawyers warn. The kind of people who are doing this don't care about that.
They don't.
So
this is kind of the flip side of what we talked about last week, where the attorneys at Morgan and Morgan were using LLMs to generate their case briefs, and then the LLMs were generating fictitious case law. That's something that they should care about, and then they weren't checking. In this case, like you said, the employees don't care. They just want to generate, maybe get a win out of this. But at the end of the day, they're achieving their goal by disrupting what's going on at the company and just, basically being jerks.
If you make enough noise, they'll pay you to go away, and you find your next victim. So once again, another thing we're going to keep our eye on. But
speaking of noise and crazy AI stories, it's now time for the CVE of the week. Okay, so the CVE of the week is our weekly segment where we pick a common vulnerability and an exposure entry that you need to know about and mitigate ASAP. But as been our trend for the last few weeks, we're going to step aside from the CVE of the week and talk about a security vulnerability in the field that you do need to know about. So in this case, Lou, let's talk about what happens when you get breached.
Yeah, and this is the thing that they never seem to cover, right? In any of their articles we read, they never cover, okay, how did it get in? What happened to the person that it got in with? So I picked this up from the Wall Street Journal, and it's a story about a gentleman named Matthew Van Andel, known as Dutch, who's now a former Disney employee. And this is what happened. His digital unraveling began last February. These are the words in Wall Street Journal. He downloaded a free software from a popular code sharing hub site called GitHub. Yeah, we all use GitHub. This is a great example of why maybe you should look at some of the code on GitHub and go, uh-oh, and make sure you're downloading it from somebody who's hasn't tampered with the code. So he downloaded something to try it, and I believe this was on his personal computer, to try a new artificial intelligence technology on his home computer, his personal one. And so what he was doing is the software was creating AI images from text prompts. Now, look, we all play with this stuff. I usually download it on the Mac, but which might or might not give me some level of sandboxing. Actually, it does on this thing. Apparently, whatever he downloaded, and it worked, right? The code worked. That's the problem. He was getting his images, but it was actually malware. And it gave the individual that posted it, the hacker behind it, full access to his computer and his digital life. From there, the malware individual, the malefactor in this case, I guess, was able to gain access to 1Password. At that point, you're screwed, right? If they get your password management system, you're screwed. And because this individual had all of his passwords in it and other sensitive information, they were also able to get to the session cookies inside of his browser, which means if they copy those cookies, go to log in, it's already got the stored state, right? Boom, I just own Slack. Now I've got your passwords. I've got all of your session cookies, online devices. Now, here comes the fun part. At this point, Disney was running Slack for all internal communications. Now, to amplify out of order on this stuff, they are moving away from Slack and going to something different. So, this happens in February. On July 11th, he gets a Discord message from a stranger. So, what, 5 months? 5 months this individual's been in his system. And it started with his personal home computer. So he gets a message from a stranger on July 11th, does not ignore it, immediately calls Disney's fire team, goes, oh my God, there's a corporate group that was set up to respond to cyber threats. They confirmed that his Slack account had been breached, saw nothing suspicious on his corporate laptop. Told him to go check his personal devices, right? He had an antivirus. The antivirus didn't catch it. He loaded another antivirus and immediately got it. So he's like, boom. What happened next? The next morning, lunchtime Slack exchange became one of more than 44 million Disney messages from Slack, published online by a cryptic hacking group with murky motivations. Very sinister. Are there ones that don't have that? I don't know. They used his login credentials to steal from his employer. So, hacks sent Disney's cybersecurity team into motion to assess the damage. Private customer information, employee passport numbers, theme park, and streaming revenues were in the data dump. So, at this point, I need to pause and say that John and I were both middle to upper management in our last company. Every quarter, we had to certify certain things about sales. We were in the sales organization that was material to our coming financial results. This is a nuclear bomb for finance. The breach completely upended Van Andel's life. The hacker stole his credit card numbers, racked up bills, leaked his account login details, including those for his financial accounts, all his banks and stuff, published his personal information online, ranging from his social security number, login credentials that could be used to access the Ring cameras within his home. And then, because that wasn't fun enough, Disney fires him, telling him it found he'd accessed pornographic material on the device. Okay, that is got to be one of the... That's a tough one. If this individual, this hacker, owned that machine, what are you going to do? Go out and get some porn. You're going to do...
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a possibility that the hackers did that, or it could be that that's why he downloaded this image generator tool as well. But you know what's interesting is while you were chatting, I went and looked up our show notes, and we've done 24 CVEs of the week, and this is the second time Disney has been one of them.
That's true. And you know what the first one was, I think, was the result of this hack.
No, the other one was when the Disney employee got fired but retained access and then changed the menus to wingdings and to QR codes to point
and took out all the peanuts. That's
so
right.
that shows a significant lack of security across the Disney organization. So they need to do some investigations. They need to go do some digging as to what's going on there, and tighten things up, because that's too big of an organization to be allowing this type of stuff to be happening.
It's a problem, and all I can say is, first of all, I use 1Password. I like it.
Yeah.
Turn on two-factor authentication.
Definitely.
Turn it on. I did that. I'm like, oh crap, I initially set this thing up. I didn't know if I was going to hold on to it. I'm like, okay, I like this. I'm going to go back, make sure you've got it two-factor set up. Second thing is, try to keep your work and your life separate.
And then implement zero trust.
Zero trust. Good Lord, yes.
Right? Make sure that stuff's going on and that the personal laptop doesn't have access into the deep, dark areas of your network where you don't want, a potential rogue AI to go in and get access to everything. Come on.
Well, I mean, even a question is, how much of this stuff did they pull out through Slack?
Right.
I've used Slack, but I've never used it in a corporate environment. I've used it on and off depending on projects that we were working on with partners, right? Yep. Or other things. I like it. It's a nice setup. It makes it easier for you to work. But if that looks like the primary breach into the messages was through one user.
Yeah.
How in the hell did they get all those messages? Did they exploit a problem with Slack, or does the average user with a little bit of knowledge have the ability to go horizontally across this platform and do that?
Maybe he was a moderator or administrator or something.
I don't know. That's, but the dude lost his job. Disney had a material breach in their fiduciary information, which is a special thing. Now, they had to go back and do a regulatory filing in August on this when it was investigating the incident. But this is definitely a black eye. When you think about these vulnerabilities, and we'll get back to covering specific vulnerabilities as we go. Next week, we're going to do a little bit deeper dive on some of other things that can really catch you, which are, what are the government laws around privacy and what can they do? So look for that next week. This is a really, really sad story for somebody, and in a way, I think, first of all, it was very careless of that individual to do this. But most people aren't that security minded. Right. They can't be. So we as IT people need to figure out a way that you can access your work and your life.
Well, you would think that to the people that we're talking to, the IT professionals, that all this should be obvious. But obviously to some of the Disney IT folks, it's not obvious. And we keep seeing these breaches over and over again for different companies that, so the message needs to get out there. Zero trust. Make sure that you have a way to shut down people's credentials. Don't allow rogue systems. I don't know if this Slack system was rogue or not. Was it tied to corporate credentials? Who knows? But you can't allow systems out there that are not tied to corporate credentials, so that when somebody does get fired, they need to get shut down. Things along those lines. There's basic best practices that are out there. And it's our jobs as IT professionals to make sure that we are following those best practices.
I mean, honestly, if they'd even had a device manager that was running when he had the passwords on, I mean, in theory, he could have been accessing the passwords for work through his home machine.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, we've all done it.
But even
it's
then,
it's a web service, right? Slack is a web service. It's easy to do. But the question now, how do you divide those domains?
Yeah.
And protect those domains?
100%.
This is big.
So with that, we're going to go ahead and dip into the mailbag. And we got a couple of emails from longtime listener Tim, who actually came to us from DTNS, which is how we got our launch. And so I want a big shout out to Tom and Roger over at DTNS for that. And I'll by the way, today marks 6 months that we've been doing IT Sparkcast. So big thank you to all of you that have been listening from the beginning, including Tim. Big thanks to Lou. Congratulations for making it this far, Lou. We're going to keep going. Looking forward to the next 6 months. But Tim sent us an email and he said, I'm a recent subscriber to your show thanks to its featured spot on DTNS this past summer. And I've been really enjoying it and benefiting from it on my day-to-day job as an enterprise level sysadmin. I wanted to chime in on the CVE of the week and just say that although my work team has dedicated cybersecurity positions, the news in this area touches all of us in IT. I hope you continue to cover it, but whether or not it maintains its title and whether or not it focuses specifically on CVEs or just cybersecurity news in general, it's strongly important to me. So you've been hearing us keep saying that we may or may not be doing CVEs each week. But we will be talking about security, and we're talking about whether we keep the segment. I think we will keep the segment, but again, there'll be weeks like this week, we don't necessarily talk about CVEs. We will talk about the greater security threats that are out there. A few weeks ago, we talked about the UK and they're wanting backdoor access into iCloud. That's a security threat. Then we will talk about CVEs when we feel that those are big enough threats. He and I traded emails back and forth, and then he did follow up and saying that I also really love the remote work series. I love that you guys have been hammering home the point about management issues versus actual remote work issues. So we've been saying in our remote work series that when remote work fails, it's almost always due to middle management failures. You either have micromanagement issues or you have absentee management issues. If you have a strong manager that understands how to properly manage remote workers, remote work can succeed, especially when IT is involved in providing the right tools. And we've been going up against folks like Andy Jassy and Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan. Matter of fact, go watch this past episode from earlier this week where we went through the whole rant from Jamie Dimon, where he had a profanity-laced rant about what's going wrong with remote work, and he's wrong, and we talk about why he's wrong. So go watch that. That's great.
Yeah, I get that we're in a transition period, and folks, the other thing is, don't think that while we're saying management, we also have to think about the technology, right?
100%.
And we've had some real challenges with the technology, and some vendors not following all the way through. Some vendors adding the features, but it's not in the base level package. So your CFO goes, oh, I don't want this. I get all this other stuff for free. It is, you still need to fight and have a tight vision of what you want this stuff to be.
It really does fall on IT to make sure that remote work succeeds, and to be the flag bearer and the example for everybody else. If you can make remote work succeed and hybrid work, because sometimes IT folks do have to be in the office and sometimes full-time in the office to make sure the systems are up and running. And then when you can manage that hybrid kind of situation, then you can show, yes, it does work. And then you can show cost savings because of that. We got a whole series on it. Go watch it. You'll really get a lot of it. But that is going to cover this week. Do you have topics you want us to cover? Do you have thoughts on our security segment? Should we call it CVE of the week? Should we change the name to something else? Do you want us to really focus specifically on CVEs, or do you like the fact that we're broadening out to the greater topics out there? Send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback@itsparkcast.com, or hit us up on X @itsparkcast. You can also reach out to us on LinkedIn, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below. We read every single comment and email, and we respond to almost every single one. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. That's really going to help us grow. We've seen a lot of new subscribers recently. We really appreciate every single one of you. And we are looking forward to your feedback. And again, that's going to wrap up this episode. We're going to be back next week for more news and opinions from the world of enterprise IT. Take care.
Thanks for stopping by.